Hey everyone, and welcome to The Year Was, the podcast all about today that gives you just enough information to effectively be that guy at the party, causing all your friends to question, hey, who invited you? Like, seriously, why are you here? I'm your host, Michael Montalvo, and for the next few minutes we will open history's door and find out what makes today truly unique. On this episode, we examine the events that occurred today, October 23rd. Okay, show of hands. How many of you have had plastic surgery? That's just about as many as I thought. Well, how many of you know the history of plastic surgery? Don't worry, it ties into October 23rd eventually. Believe it or not, plastic surgery actually began over 4,000 years ago. Doctors in ancient India were performing skin grafts as early as 800 BC, but progress was slow from the start, as it took thousands of years for techniques to be introduced and eventually refined by Western countries. The West at this time being none other than Rome. It was a Roman medical writer, Aulus Cornelius Celsus, who laid out in De Medicina, I got all of that pronounced wrong, his surgical methods for the reconstruction of ears, lips, and noses. And it was later in the Byzantine period, in the mid-1400s, that Oribasius, who was a Greek medical writer, compiled a massive 70-volume encyclopedia, the Synagogue Medicae, that dedicated numerous passages to the reconstruction of facial defects. While plastic surgery would be practiced in the early Middle Ages, there came an event that brought everything to a standstill. Does anybody want to venture a guess? I can't hear you, but let's assume someone said the fall of the Roman Empire and the spread of Christianity. At this point in time, science had no place in society, and it was moved aside in favor of more important areas of study like those of mysticism and religion. The oddly named, in my own opinion, I want to point that out, Pope Innocent III actually went as far as to declare surgery in any form prohibited by the church. It was with this declaration that scientific knowledge was replaced by personal and spiritual concerns. In all fairness, surgical patients were not exactly well looked after, with no standards set for hygiene or cleanliness. And because of that, the risk for infection was very high. Despite all of this, minor advances were still being made, including a procedure to repair a cleft lip in the 10th century. I'm sure you know, but just in case, a cleft lip is when the mouth does not form properly during pregnancy. During the Renaissance, more advances were made in science and technology, and with these advances brought the development of safer and more effective techniques. In the 15th century, Seraphedin Sabunkuglu's text, The Imperial Surgery, included material on maxillofacial surgery, or in the simplest of terms that I could find, a specialized version of dentistry, as well as eyelid surgery. It even included a protocol for the treatment of gynecomastia and is believed to be the foundation for the modern method of surgical breast reduction. I should mention I'm going to get most of these pronunciations wrong. And this was all in the 15th century. By the 17th century, plastic surgery was on its way out again, and then by the 18th century, it started its road back, acting kind of like a yo-yo. But it was the 19th century that things started to heat up, if you know what I mean. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. The year was 1814, and on this day, October 23rd, the first modern plastic surgery was performed in London by Joseph Constantine Carpue. Carpue was fascinated with the medical sciences that had come out of Indian and Islamic text. He read reports of rhinoplasties being performed on Indian soldiers in 1794 and actually traveled to India to study these techniques and methods that they used. He ended up staying there for 20 years, and upon his return to Chelsea, worked in the Duke of York Hospital, where he continued his research. As a surgeon and anatomist, when an army officer approached him, he prepared for what would end up being the first nose reconstruction in Britain. The soldier, who I couldn't find a name, had lost much of his nose to mercury treatments, which, while toxic, were actually used to treat diseases at the time. Carpue cut a loose strip of skin from the officer's forehead, twisted it, and folded it down over the nose and secured it to incisions in the nasal area. He then molded the new nose into shape. The officer spent many days bandaged and immobilized on his back, and if the legends are to be believed, when the bandages were removed, Carpue exclaimed, "My God, there is a nose." The flap of skin was the patient's own, and so the body accepted the graft with no problem and little scarring. Because of this, it was considered a success, and the operation was later repeated. In 1827, the first American plastic surgery would be performed by surgeon John Peter Metior in the form of the first cleft palate operation done with instruments he designed himself. It wasn't until the 20th century and the horrors of the Great War that plastic surgeries rose to new levels in the medical communities. Military physicians were required to treat many of the extensive facial and head injuries caused by modern weaponry that had not been seen before. These extensive surgeries required new innovations in procedure, and some of the most skilled surgeons dedicated their practices to restoring the country's soldiers to a life that was as close to what they knew. Facial prosthetics were made and widely used, but with the advances in surgery, it was possible for these men, some who had been unable to eat or drink or speak, soldiers who had lost their identities, to have hope. Dr. Harold Gillies pioneered a new reconstructive surgery technique that restored faces and normalcy to the lives of those who opted for the surgery. Because of improvements in anesthesia and treating infections, these battle injuries had become survivable and treatable. Gillis opened the Queen's Hospital in June of 1917 after a flood of injured men from the Battle of Somme overwhelmed his facility. Patients without chins, noses, cheekbones, and eyes were brought in and treated, but due to the severe trauma they had endured, had mirrors kept away from them. He was considered the father of modern plastic surgery, and after the war ended in 1918, Gillis continued his work at Queen's Hospital until 1925, chronicling his work in his 1920 book, Plastic Surgery of the Face. He would go on to further work on the soldiers of World War II and even pioneered gender reassignment surgery. Knowing all of this, what has plastic surgery become today? Well, it's still used for reconstruction, but with the development of silicone, it's become mostly cosmetic and elective. It is becoming less invasive, but is being designed to hide the visible signs of aging, with over 1 million Botox injections taking place every year. There is a debate as to how much is too much in terms of the procedures, with focus on the creation of unrealistic and unobtainable goals in beauty without the help of such treatments. As with anything, there are risks and rewards, and as the world becomes more educated, the stigma that is associated with cosmetic surgery is quickly vanishing. What do you think? From a way to help people live a normal life to a way to help us attain a look of perfection, what are your thoughts about plastic surgery? Let me know in the comments. And that's going to do it for us today. If you like this podcast and want to hear more, give us a rate and a review. That helps me out and helps steer this in the direction that is hopefully good for everybody. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can find the audio version on your podcast app of choice. Links in the description. You can find me on social media and at YouTube at the Apple Cider Club. And as always, I want to thank the Tim Kreitz Band for our musical theme. and thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.